Time. Hello, guys. So we're live again after the previous time it didn't work. I'm pretty sure it will work this time. Just using the normal what you call it, Hangouts on air, and hopefully we get our viewers back. I see there's just one guy watching. But in any case, if you guys are watching this, be sure to share it with your friends. What we are going to talk about today is definitely something that people need to notice. I've got a very special guest on here, Mr. Graeme Joffe. He very recently released a book. I'm going to show it to you right now. Um, Sports, Greed, and Betrayal Wanted for Crimes Against Journalism. All right, so I'm going to include a link to the Amazon link in the description to this book. I have read this book uh, myself, and I was very, very impressed. It's actually like reading Lewis Carroll and going down the rabbit hole, and you just see how far down the rabbit hole goes of what's going on, the corruption at Naspers and DSTV and so forth. On this channel, we recently actually made a video about corruption at Multichoice, and we basically talked about two things. We talked about the fact that, of course, Gwede Mantasse's son-in-law is the CEO of MultiChoice, and we talked about the fact that there was preferential treatment given to the Guptas even after their channel has been exposed to spread propaganda in order to incite racial hatred. It was all kept on, and nothing was done about it. And also the fact that Netflix was being harassed, one can say, by the state because DSTV ran to the state, to the ANC government, and asked them to shut down the competition for DSTV, which is Netflix. And of course, this worked, and a lot of regulations has been put in place to make it very difficult for Netflix to operate in South Africa. And even the Netflix we have today are far worse than the one that we can get in America. So, talking to Mr. Joffe will only focus on the sports section at DSTV, which is super sports and the sports in this country, but just seeing how much corruption there actually is in the sports in this country, it's just astonishing. And if this is just a sport, it actually opens up a whole can of worms. So, you can see how much corruption there will be in other sectors of the country and also in other sectors at MultiChoice. So, if you were just starting watching this video right now, it's going to be a very, very interesting conversation. Of course, check out Mr. Joffe's book. I'm going to show you again here. This is what it looks like on Amazon, and I actually also included a link in the description to this book on Amazon. I have been to exclusive books to see if I can actually buy a hard copy of the book. Mr. Joffe was actually kind enough to send me the ebook format, but I haven't seen it in any of the bookstores. So the only link that I'm aware of is the one on Amazon. So if you haven't yet, go check it out. It's absolutely brilliant. Thanks for coming up on the show, Mr. Joffe.
Willem, thank you very much. And, I just really appreciate your time, your interest, and your support. Unfortunately, South Africa has no culture of investigative journalism. And so I became a lone crusader for 6 or 7 years, turned my life upside down, but no regrets. And it's a great opportunity, this, just to share with the people of South Africa what is really happening in South African sport, because the truth just doesn't seem to be able to get out there. And that's because of a very conflicted media, just a very corrupt media as well. And South African sport is corrupt from top to bottom, from the sports ministry to SASCOG, the Olympic Committee, to the various sporting federations, to clubs. It's a very sad state. And what are happening now, you have all these administrators that are prioritizing self-enrichment, and the only people that are suffering at the end of the day are the athletes, the sportsmen and sportswomen of South Africa, who have no voice. They're silenced by draconian codes of conduct, and the whole system. It's systemic corruption in South African sport, maladministration, nepotism, and for what South Africa has in facilities, finance, resources, and talent, we should be getting 30 medals at the Olympic Games. We get 6 or 7, and we celebrate it like we've won the World Cup. It's a sad state of affairs, and I'm just glad for this opportunity, and salute the work that you do for trying to make South Africa a better place.
Well, thank you very much. Let's start the interview on a bit of a lighter note, and then we'll get into the heavier stuff later on in the interview. So actually, you are living in America right now. You actually started your career in sport journalism in America, and then you came back to South Africa. Tell us a bit about how you started out and why you decided to come back to South Africa.
Willem had a very fortunate career. I graduated from Rhodes University in Grahamstown, had an incredible 3 years, graduated with a Bachelor of Arts, majored in journalism and German. And then I went over to the United States at the beginning of 1992, and my sister was in Chicago. And while I was there, I thought, let me just try my luck, and sent out probably about 100 resumes and CVs all over the United States to TV, radio, and print press. I wanted to be a sports journalist from my days as a young kid watching Trevor Quirk on television. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a Trevor Quirk kind of person. And I got very lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. I'd sent a CV to CNN. And if you'll remember, at the beginning of 92 with the Gulf War, CNN International had just started. And CNN International just needed someone who knew about cricket, soccer, rugby, tennis, and golf. As you know, here in the United States, the big four sports are ice hockey, football, baseball, and basketball. And I was in the right place at the right time. I had a background in journalism. I had no TV experience. And CNN hired me. April 1992, started at CNN. And as I say, they were desperate when they hired me. But it was an incredible experience. I got thrown into the deep end, became an international sports anchor for CNN in 1992 with no TV experience. And it was a great time for me. I learned the tricks. I learned the whole trade. I drowned for the first 2 years. But I remember CNN International in those days was broadcast late at night back in South Africa. And my mother kept telling me how good I was doing. Meantime, I was a terrible anchor. I knew about sport, and I knew about, I had a passion for sport, and I loved every sport. But at the end of the day, I needed some help with, television. Live TV is not an easy thing. But it set me up for life. And I spent 7 incredible years at CNN. I learned all about the American sports, learned about television. And as a sports journalist, I always wanted to come back to South Africa. That's where my heart is. That's where my passion was. And I wanted to give back, and I wanted to share my 7 years of experience at CNN and share what I had with the media in South Africa. And I came back in 2000 to South Africa, worked a little bit for SuperSport and a production company. And I got to travel around the world, got to the Sydney Olympic Games. I did a documentary series on African sporting heroes, traveled right throughout Africa. Then I became the morning sports presenter on 94.7 on the Rude Awakening with Jeremy Mansfield. And it was only in about 2011, that I went out on my own and became a freelance journalist and got involved in investigative journalism purely by default. And I'm not sure if you'll recall, but in 2012, there was that big controversy between the EP Kings and the Lions. And which team was going to get into Super Rugby, and how the Lions needed to be relegated and the EP Kings needed to be promoted. And South African rugby had made a huge hash of that. There was no promotion relegation system. Saru had promised the EP Kings that they would get into Super Rugby, but there was no system in place. And suddenly there was a huge agenda from a media company in South Africa called Highbury Safika Media, and Mark Keohane, who has a lot to answer for. And basically, he was now supporting the EP Kings agenda and pushing Luke Watson, pushing the EP Kings, only for me to find out that he was an unaccredited agent for Luke Watson. And he was stood to benefit financially if the EP Kings got into Super Rugby. Mark Keohane, as Luke Watson's agent, was going to benefit. He was also doing work for the EP Kings. And all of a sudden, I started exposing this on Twitter. And then Mark Keohane and his other cronies from Highbury Safika Media started trying to blackmail me instead of answering the questions. And they just tried to blackmail me. And then what led to me digging further, and I started to find out that Highbury Safika Media and Mark Keohane were the media partners for SASCOG, with basically a huge tender that they never even tendered for. And they became the spin doctors for the Olympic Committee of South Africa. And that just turned me, from that day on, I started digging, and suddenly athletes, coaches, and administrators all started to confide in me. Because there's no culture of investigative sports journalism in South Africa, suddenly these people started to see that here's a guy that's prepared to stand up for the truth and what's really happening in South African sport. And it snowballed from there. It snowballed. It went crazy. It became a total addiction for me. And the Olympic Committee of South Africa then sued me for defamation for 21 million in my personal capacity. I was writing columns for News 24 and The Citizen and just exposing the deep rot in South African sport. And that led to more and more things happening, national lottery, which is totally corrupt. And eventually I was chased out the country 4 years ago. I had a private investigator helping me. To this day, I now believe that I was probably double crossed by the private investigator, which is just crazy. But someone high up made sure that I got out, that I was chased out of the country. My emails were hacked. My phone was illegally tapped. I was followed around. Mega Pro, a marketing company linked to a lot of sports in South Africa, paid for me to be spied on. It was an absolute mess. And when you're a lone crusader, no one's backing you, no one's supporting you. I had a big target on my back. And 4 years ago, I left with a suitcase and a laptop and got out to the United States, and that's where I am today. And yes, it's might sound like a Russian spy novel, but at the end of the day, I've got my ethics and integrity. I have absolutely no regrets. I'm standing up for the truth. And still to this day, I get emails, text messages, WhatsApp messages from people in South African sport that have got so many issues and so much exposing this corruption, this deep corruption. And it's so crazy that I've been out of the country for 4 years and I'm still the go-to guy in South African sport to expose the corruption.
Well, that's quite a summary you just gave us there. Would you tell us? Do you think that you were actually threatened? Like, would they have actually done something, or how do you mean you were double crossed by this private investigator that you've got? Do you think they tried to make it look much worse than it is, and then you fled from something that wasn't really a threat, or what exactly does that mean?
Willem, I tend, so obviously I don't know for a fact, but so I can just put you in the picture. What happened is I'd moved from Johannesburg to Grahamstown. That was at 2014. Basically, I needed to get out the limelight because things were already getting tough for me in Johannesburg. The pressure and being followed around and stuff like that. And then I got a call April the 1st, 2014. I got a call from a guy called Clem de Santos, who's involved in South African equestrian. And he said they had to expose a whole lot of corruption in South African equestrian, and they wanted to come and fly and see me in Grahamstown. So I said, guys, don't come and, but then I'd started my own digital publication. And I said, guys, don't fly to come and see me. Send me the information via email, because I already had a whole lot of stuff on South African equestrian. They said, no, Graeme, we need to come and see you. So these guys three guys flew from Johannesburg to Grahamstown in a private jet and flew into this military airfield in Grahamstown. And it felt like I was in a movie. I'm standing in this airfield with it's not manned. Grahamstown Military Air Base is like just a little field. And when this jet flew in, up until it flew in, I was like looking at my watch going, when are these guys arriving? And then I go, Graeme, April 1st. What are you thinking? It's an April Fool's joke, obviously. But then the jet came in, and there these guys get out, the 2 pilots and 3 guys. And 3 guys, Bob O'Neill, Clem de Santos, and Tim Marsland. Anyway, they exposed the whole rot to me in South African equestrian. They said they then had a private investigator to help me, that they were looking into rhino poaching in South Africa. And I put up my hands and said, boys, I can't go down that road. I mean, now you're really putting me under fire. I'm exposing sports corruption. The rhino poaching, I don't even want to get into. I mean, that's another whole animal on its own, no pun intended. And Tim Marsland said to me, he's got this private investigator on his books. He's going to help me. When I get back to Joburg, he's going to get in touch with me and he'll help me, because I knew my phone that Habri Safika Media had created a fake website to defame me and discredit me. And basically they'd got information that was happening every day. But I knew my phone had been tapped and I knew my emails had been hacked, but I got no help. MTN didn't want to help me. SANEF, the SA National Editors Forum, didn't want to help me. No one wanted to help me. Just a guy fighting this battle on his own. But to cut a long story short, Tim Marsland got the private investigator to help me. I never met this guy called Theo Bronkhorst in Bloemfontein, but he found 4 diversions on my phone. He was trying to help me. So I thought, I'm looking for any help I can get. And eventually on the 17th of April, I got a call a Friday night from Tim Marsland saying, Graeme, we got Theo Bronkhorst has intercepted a threat to your safety. You better get out of your apartment. They're coming to get you this weekend in Grahamstown. So you can imagine my heart starts racing. I pack an overnight bag, go to a friend's house in Port Alfred, take the SIM card out of my cell phone, park my car at a remote location at a hotel, just so that they couldn't track me. Had a sleepless night, called Tim Marsland in the morning, and he says to me, Graeme, let's identify the threat. Why don't you come stay with me in Johannesburg for 4 days? And I barely knew the guy. I'd met him once. And so I had no option. I just trusted him. I thought, let me go with my gut feel. And I stayed with Tim Marsland for 2 or 3 days underground in Joburg. He kept talking to Theo. Theo kept saying, no, the heat is still on. He's diverted my phone to Rustenburg. I couldn't live. I was just, and they agreed that it's good for me to get out of the kitchen. It's getting hot. And that's when I flew out to the United States to assist her in the United States. Tim and I remained in contact for about 3 months on WhatsApp. All these arrests were going to happen. Tubby Reddy was going to be arrested, the CEO of SASCOG, Raymond Hack, a woman from Equestrian, another person who was supposedly involved in the rhino poaching, and I was going to be vindicated. And it was like it never stopped. The WhatsApp messages kept on going. It kept going. You're going to be vindicated. The rest are going to happen. Nothing ever happened until about a few months ago, after I published my book. Anyway, I gave up with Tim. I gave up with Theo. I just said, let me move on. Nothing's ever going to happen. This just feels like it's almost like a fairy tale story. I mean, it feels like you're making up stuff. And eventually about a month ago, I got word that Tim Marsland is on Interpol's most wanted in Botswana for a huge, huge financial crisis with insurance funds and pensioners funds. So he's on Interpol's most wanted. And then I checked up on Theo Bronckhorst, and there's a Facebook page from last year about the con artist Theo Bronckhorst, and there are about 50 people that reference him to what a con artist is, money that they've never got. He's not really a private investigator, and he's just a no good. So at the end of the day, I now believe that when it got to the heat, because they were talking about how there were other private investigators involved from the other side, and SASCOG had got people involved, and it became a real mess. And I'd opened up a criminal case that got chased around the country, and basically nothing ever happened. It got swept under the carpet, and Theo Bronckhorst, and I believe now Tim Marsland and Theo Bronckhorst were involved to a way that they were then paid off by somebody else to get me out the country, to stop my digital publication, to make sure that I couldn't testify in any criminal case, I couldn't testify at any commission. And I've also recently found out that old Tim Marsland, as corrupt as he is now good mates with Imtiaz Patel from Multichoice, and they've spent some time in China together, with Tim flying Imtiaz Patel and the former lawyer for President Zuma to China to do some business deals. So if I put 2 and 2 together and join the dots, I think I've been double-crossed.
All right, so I actually want to start getting into the actual detail and the meat of your book. But before we get into that, would you tell me, would you feel safe to come back to South Africa and start actually on the ground here promoting your book and start, at the grassroots, push these things that you have found out in South Africa, start testifying in court cases and so on and so forth? Because I think not just with the sports, but with everything at Multichoice and the DSTV, it's going to blow up. We see so much government and government intervention in media, and we have a massive monopoly here. But all of this is coming to an end. Do you think you can come back to South Africa and start doing what you were doing again, or are you going to stay in the United States?
Willem, unfortunately, I wouldn't know who to trust. And I personally don't think I'd get through immigration. I think there'd be a big red flag. I know too much, Willem. I've seen too much. I've got books. I could write another book tomorrow on just the information that I've got since my book was published. There is so much dirt and so much scandal. And what's happened is, what happens when someone writes something or talks about something, it gives power to other people to come forward. And even now, more recently, I've got some real big corporates that have come forward with some of the corruption that's been happening in South African sport. And my launch of my book in Johannesburg is supposed to be the 27th of June. Harbury Safika Media, the dirty, corrupt company that they are, have now basically threatened legal action against the bookstore in Monte Casino called Scoobs if they go ahead with the book launch. So right now, the distributors got nervous. Everybody's running a bit nervous. And it's crazy because the truth needs to get out. I will never stop fighting. I've got to finish what I started, and I'm still so passionate about South African sport, and my heart breaks for what's happening with some of these athletes because they've got no voice and how they're being treated. And again, it's all about the structures from grassroots development. Why so much is not happening? Why is South African cricket team performing badly? Why is there no boxing at the Olympic Games? I can go into all of this, of the structures, but it's a corruption. It's corruption from top to bottom. It's administrators who are prioritizing self-enrichment, and they're not, the athletes come second. And lastly, the chance to expose all of this was 5 years ago when SASCOG sued me for defamation for 21 million. I said to the lawyers, let's go. I had dossiers and dossiers. Let's go to court. The saddest part about that is I had personal indemnity insurance, and Hollard then basically were my insurers. They took over the case. And they then settled with SASCOG, with that case hanging over my head for 5 years and nothing ever happening with it. SASCOG knew they were not going to court. They knew I had all the dirt on them. It was a malicious prosecution. And Hollard then took a business decision to settle with SASCOG for about R1 million. And I looked like the absolute fool at the end of the day. It wasn't my case.
You were the one paying them R1 million. That's basically what happens.
Well, that's what it was written about. News 24 and everyone. Graeme Joffe settles case with SASCOG. And I told Hollard actually pushed me into a corner. And I said, guys, there's no ways I'm settling. At the end of the day, I was advised, Graeme, just get rid of it. Let Hollard do whatever they want to do. And they conflicted as well. One of the big boys at Hollard's involved in South African rowing. He knows how dirty SASCOG is. He knows them. They are so dirty. SASCOG is totally corrupt. At the end of the day, the case was settled. I look like the journalist with no credibility, but it doesn't matter because I've been vindicated over and over again with the SASCOG Commission of Inquiry. And the more things come out now, and you know what? It's okay. But I wish 5 years ago the lawyers had listened to me and gone, we got SASCOG into court. If I could have got discovery, and I gave them a list for discovery of bank accounts, I know the people with all the money. I know that the contracts, I know who's got the sponsorships. I know who the hidden companies are. And we start tackling people like Sedgars and Fly Africa and Megapro. Now we're starting to open a real can of worms. I was denied the opportunity. What do they say? Justice delayed is justice denied.
Well, the thing is, and it was actually in your book as well, and in the documents that you sent me, DStv and MultiChoice hadn't made any profits for the last 5 years. It looks like Naspers is going to drop them. And we talked a bit about MTS Patel here. And one of the things that you sent me about him was the fact that he actually went through and pushed through a channel called Islamic TV on DStv. And that's just an example of many. This channel had a viewership of less than 5,000 people. So basically they had a viewership of, I don't want to brag here, but less than 100 times as many people as I do on this YouTube channel. And the CEO of this channel earn between 200 and 300,000 rands per month. And it's just, I don't see how it's possible for just one employee to make this much. I don't even think the channel can even make nearly that much, but yet still Mr. Patel pushed through this channel. That's what you sent me here. So all of these things, and of course I can say this is not the only such scandal that happened. All of these things will come crashing down on DStv, and I'm pretty sure we will see DStv fall apart because of these things, of course.
And Willem, that's just the tip of the iceberg. And, that the Islam channel's just one entity we're talking about here, where Imtiaz Patel has given favors to friends. He's been again getting kickbacks. I expose him in the book for a lot of different kickbacks, from Sedgars, the PSL TV rights deal that SuperSport scored from a very offside position. Him and Ivan Korza are big friends, very powerful people. There was a bribe basically paid to Ivan Korza to make sure that SuperSport got the PSL TV rights. And then there's been some in-house companies within SuperSport with these BEE credentials that Imtiaz Patel has formed with his friends, a guy called Elvin Nike, who's a big producer at SuperSport. They've given BEE components to people that work at SuperSport, and these companies within SuperSport have been given the big contracts for graphics, for outside broadcasts. It's ludicrous and paying inflated prices. So hence why there are no profits showing maybe for SuperSport and DStv is because they've got now these BEE BEE companies that Imtiaz Patel and Elvin Naika have created under pseudo-names and different entities, and they're getting all these contracts. Supersport outside broadcast vans are sitting back at home base while the company that these guys have formed has got outside broadcast vans doing all the work. It's unbelievable. The graphics for Supersport done by Elvin Naika's daughter. These contracts are inflated prices, and there's so much more going on there. And there's a lot of double
that's something
dipping.
you see everywhere where BEE is involved, because it's so easy to play the system with BEE.
Yeah. And
especially if you have a guy on the inside like Imtiaz Patel.
Yeah, and MTS basically told people right in the beginning when I started my investigative, my lone crusade. He told friends of mine, tell Graeme Joffe to stay in his lane basically and join mainstream press. I'm going, why can't I join mainstream press if there's no investigative sports journalism? And I started getting more and more information about him, and to this day, I believe he may have had a hand in getting me chased out of the country. And I say I don't have confirmation of that. He didn't deny it when I sent him an email a couple of weeks ago. And obviously, I've informed the FBI. I had a good meeting with the FBI when I first came out to the United States at the time that the FIFA scandal broke about South Africa bribing to host the 2010 World Cup. And I got involved and I got to meet the guys from the FBI. And I've informed them of all these different details because I just want to make sure that these kind of guys aren't going to still come after me, because I have a lot of information still to share. And I want to make sure that there's justice. Imtiaz Patel is a very, very dirty player. We know what he did with ANN7, but what is he? Is he really just a puppet master for Koos Becker and them at Naspers? That's where I think we're going to head down that road eventually.
Well, of course, that's the big problem that we are sitting here in South Africa. Ultimately, is the fact that a person like yourself, you have absolutely no platform to go to, because all of the media companies, I think probably South Africa is one of the countries with the biggest monopoly on media, because basically Naspers owns every single mode of TV broadcasting in this country. There's no other company that has anything to do with TV broadcasting, and they own most of the newspapers. They own News 24. They own almost all of the Afrikaans print newspapers. Actually all of them, all of the big ones. They own all of the online Afrikaans newspapers except Marula Media. And in English, they own, I would say, roughly 60 to 70% of the newspapers. I haven't counted it yet and made a calculation, but it would be somewhere there. So who exactly do you go to? Because all of these media outlets are owned by the exact same company.
So that, Willem, you make a valid point here, because when I got sued by SASCOG for the 21 million in my personal capacity, at the time I was writing for News 24, and they ran for cover. Basically, they said, no, sorry, we can't support you in your legal case because you're not a full-time employee. So, and obviously SASCOG, we're not going to sue Naspers because they've got deep pockets. They wanted to cripple me financially, and they bully me and silence me, and sent out a strong message to any other sports journalist. If you're going to come after us, this is what's going to happen to you. And what happened to me as a whistleblower, everything fell, my career was basically ended. Everyone runs away from a whistleblower. No one really wants to touch you. So it was tough for my career, but it didn't matter because I became a total addiction, and I had my ethics and integrity. And so much of this information that I've got in my book, I gave to Carte Blanche, I gave to News 24, I shared the information. George Mazarak,
still owned by the same company.
Correct.
As the people you are accusing.
Correct. And Carte Blanche, George Mazarakis would come back to me and say to me, we can't confirm any of your facts. And it's all been vindicated. The Cheeky Watson, EP Kings thing, the stuff with SASCOG, all the different scenarios, the lottery, the national lottery, which is something I'd love to touch on because that is one of the most corrupt entities. And that is where most of the sports corruption in South Africa is starting from. The national lottery, with guys that sit on the national lottery distribution agencies. If there's not a lifestyle audit done of these guys sooner rather than later, it's all going to come crashing down eventually.
Well, of course, and I think we are seeing the tipping point right now. Worldwide, people are having a massive distrust in the media, and of course, in countries like America, where you reside now, that distrust comes from the fact that the media is objectively very left-leaning, and this can, of course, be explained away by studies that have been done. And I've read a study by Cornell University which was also done in America, where they looked at what was the most left-wing profession and what was the most right-wing profession, and then kind of sorted the different professions into how politically aligned these professions are. And they found that journalists were the most left-wing profession, with journalists having a 92% chance to vote left-wing parties like the Democrats, and engineers were the most right-wing profession, with 89% of engineers voting for the Republican Party, which is the right-wing party in America. So, of course, we already see there the fact that journalism is far more left-wing than the average people are, and the average people are starting to notice this worldwide. But coming back to South Africa, in South Africa we have a whole different story, because it's not only that journalists are very biased left-wing; it is that they make it obvious that they have to support the governing party, which is the ANC, because these companies are the ones that are so connected to the government, and there's so much a dirty laundry between them, and so much connections between them, that these companies can't dare speak out against anything in the government. To name an example, Adrian Basson, the head of News 24, um, he recently tweeted out that he doesn't see any problem with Panyaza Lesufi, and everyone that is upset with the fact that Panyaza Lesufi is trying to basically destroy all Afrikaans schools just doesn't understand him, or something in that line. And I mean, it doesn't really matter what your politics are. Anyone can see that this is a bad thing, and anyone can see that Lesufi is basically just a massive racist. But the point I'm trying to make is that in South Africa, all of these journalists make it very clear, unapologetically, that they support the ANC in all endeavors. And also, when we just before the election season, all that I ever read about in all of these Naspers publications was how good Cyril Ramaphosa is, and how he's going to save this country, and so on and so forth. So it's just so obvious, the connection between big governments and big media in South Africa, that if it really takes serious it really takes you have to willingly ignore it to actually not see it coming. And I think your book also made it clear on the field of sports that this big relationship between the governments, the corrupt governments, and the corrupt media companies makes it almost impossible for anyone who wants to speak the truth and who wants to expose the truth happening to actually make an impact. There's just no channel for them.
Willem, again, I can't agree with you more. I mean, 120%. And the problem about South African sport with the media is the media is totally conflicted. There's very few journalists that are prepared to stand up. There's some great journalists that will stand up for the truth. Guys like Robert Marawa, who's since been his contract terminated at SuperSport, for standing up for the truth and for also wanting to stand up against sexual harassment in the workplace. That's the real reason why his contract was terminated, which is just sick. And Imtiaz Patel pushed the button on that, so which is just crazy. But then there are a few other journalists that really put up their hand on trying to fight, but it's very difficult. And also you got to remember that a lot of these sporting media companies can't afford to send their journalists to these events. Like the World Cup is how many weeks? 6 weeks. Olympic Games, 3 weeks. So it's very expensive to send a journalist over for those times. So what's happening is sporting federations in South Africa are handpicking 5 or 6 journalists to go on these tours. So in essence, they're buying favorable journalism. And why would you bite the hand that feeds you? And when Mark Cohen and these different journalists are going to braais with Yuri Roo and Rassie Erasmus at their houses, I mean, why would you want to expose Yuri Roo? And I talk about it in the book. There's a big chapter on, are we fans before we journalists? And that's what's happened in South African sport, is a lot of the sports journalists in South Africa are fans before they journalists. The whole thing with Oscar Pistorius, there were so many stories that should have been reported on before the murder happened. And basically, it was all covered up. A lot of people were friends with Oscar Pistorius. A lot of journalists were big mates with him. There was a story of one journalist who took Oscar Pistorius drinking one night when he was still underage, and they laughed about it. That's not sports journalism. Sports journalism is reporting without fear or favor and making sure that the readers or listeners and viewers are getting the truth about what's really happening. And as I said to you, under Fikile Mbalula, South African sport became more corrupt than any other entity than it's ever been before.
Well, we can definitely touch on him very soon, but the point that I wanted to make is looking at someone like Robert Marawa. There's just no way for you to stand up against this. If the sooner or the moment that a journalist like him shows just the faintest sign of non-conformity with this media company, they are quite literally, as a person, swept under the rug. They lose their job and they have absolutely nowhere else to go, because there is no other possible employer for them in their field. So, they literally need to learn to code or something in order to get a job now, because their only chance at having a job is now taken away from them in their field. And what are they going to do now?
Yeah, you got it. I get emails from so many people that have been dismissed, whether it be from the sports ministry under Alec Moemi, who's another very corrupt character, Alec Moemi, Fikile Mbalula when he was sports minister, to SASCOC, to the various federations, cricket, rugby, soccer. I get all these different emails from employees that were actually let go or dismissed because they were standing up against corruption. So what these administrators want in South African sport is they want yes people. People that will just keep saying yes, and they want people that will turn a blind eye to corruption. So what happens is you end up with a lot of administrators and officials in South African sport that are not actually suitable for the job, because they've got rid of a lot of the good people. And again, I'll bring it back to a case of border cricket, and it comes back to the lottery. And then you have border cricket that gets 50 million from the lottery over the last couple of years. Border cricket's a ghost of a province. Where's that 50 million gone? I could never get answers. That everyone took the Fifth Amendment. After about 6 months, the sports ministry, SASCOC, the federations, and all the provinces would just take the Fifth Amendment and never answer my emails. And they knew that I'd catch them out in lie after lie. And the lottery is where it all begins. There's so much money that is being spread around to different people and going into officials' back pockets. It's actually pretty scary. And it just doesn't seem like anyone wants to investigate. And it's just, on carte blanche, you'll see the story about the used car salesman and the guy that didn't fix the roof properly. It's easy to expose those guys. But how about digging a little bit deeper and exposing the real rot in South African sport? South African sport unifies the country. Give us hope. Give the people hope. Let's clean up South African sport. But the way it is at the moment, there's just no chance. It's a deeply rooted cancer with no cure right now.
Well, it's very interesting that you bring up the point that South African sport, or I would say sport in any country, unifies the peoples, or you can say the different races or the different cultures, or however you want to put it. And the fact is, all over the world, this is something we've seen in Rome as well. Also, sports can be used as a distraction to keep the people occupied, so that they can't see what's going on around them, so that they can be blind to what's actually going on. You know the famous saying of people were sitting at the Colosseum at the circus enjoying themselves while Rome was burning to the ground. So it's actually a double-edged sword in that way, actually.
And that's what happens, when the Proteas win. I mean, I use that term loosely, when the Proteas win, but when the Springboks win, when Bafana win, we know the joy that it brings to the country. And people go out into the streets and we celebrate, and we have a braai and we drink and we go, wow, what a day that was. The national team won. But what that really does is it papers over the cracks. And no one really, and sports fans don't really want to know what's going on, but now they do. The country, they've realized how much corruption is affecting the daily lives of everybody. And it's so sad, because there is so much money. With the amount of money that's given to sport from the treasury, from the lottery, from corporate sponsors, how can there not be a grassroots development system that's in place, that's working properly? How can their school sport, if you go to the private schools, yes, it's still great and it's incredible. But what about the grassroots development in the townships? Building facilities, putting cricket nets down. What's happened? Basketball courts that were put down in Port Elizabeth are now have got weeds growing through the middle of them, and kids are sitting around there smoking dope. What's happened? What's happened to the sporting system? It's totally collapsed because of corruption.
Well, as you said, sport is uniting the country, and when the Springboks win, everybody's happy, and you see this multicultural dream of Nelson Mandela, actually looking like it's a possibility in this country. You see people of different races coming together and enjoying the bride together because the Springboks just won. But do you think that this is a an outcome that the ANC wants? Do you think this is an outcome that the people who are in power in this country wants? Do they really want to see this dream of a rainbow nation look like a possibility, or do you think they are tired of this Mandela dream? Because what I see when I look at social media, when I look at Twitter, even when I look at what politicians say, most mainstream politicians say, there's almost a feeling of disgust toward Nelson Mandela, and they see him as a sellout, and they see him as a person who basically sold out the blacks, and who was a weakling, and who gave in under the strong white pressure. And I can go on, but I don't really want to, because people quote my videos out of context, and then they take what I've said and quote it somebody else, and you get the point.
No,
But do you think they really want to see this dream of a rainbow nation succeed, or do you think they want to push this country into more racial hatred?
well,
And getting rid of good sports in this country is a good way to start doing that.
yeah, it's an interesting point that you make there. Just to take a step back, when I went to Rhodes University, I was part of the unification process for the first multiracial soccer team on campus. The Rhodes University soccer team was finally united in 1990 and when you play sport together as people, it brings you closer together. It doesn't matter what race, what nationality. There's something about sport that is really unique. So if you started building sport up and you're giving kids all opportunities, first of all, you're getting them off the street. So I'm not talking about this Rainbow Nation just yet, but bringing kids through the system from the townships, giving them opportunities, getting them off the streets, bringing people together through sport. Sport is a great unifier, especially at a participation level. Where South Africa's come from, it just doesn't seem like there can be a peaceful and a non-racist society. There is extreme racism. Fikile
Mm,
Mbalula, for me, is one of the most racist people. But as soon as there's money involved, they forget about racism. As soon
of
as
course, yeah.
you're greasing somebody else's palms, it doesn't matter what color your skin is, and it's across the board. There's no corruption, has no color, it has no race, it has no religion. It's across the board, as is explained in my book. And it's just tragic that I don't. Do you see do you see this Rainbow Nation? It's only when we win that you see the
Mm,
so-called, and it's almost a fake. It's almost a fake Rainbow Nation when we
of
win.
course, yeah.
But it's all quickly forgotten when we lose. And now you blaming the white players, you blaming the black players. What about quotas? And just coming on the point of quotas, you know what quotas really are in sport? That all that quotas are is a lack is lazy administration and a lack of grassroots development. That's as simple as it is. And it's administration's fault. Too many fat cats would rather sit in an air-conditioned office and make millions from kickbacks, other deals, contracts, sponsorships, greasing palms, and they're sitting back there and, hey, I'm okay. What I have to worry about the future of this country for? Very sad, very short-sighted. And as you say, South African sport is going to come tumbling down. It's already started, and I don't want to say this, but about 7 years ago or 8 years ago, in 2012, when I started investigative sports journalism and I started seeing the stories, and I said, guys, someone's got to get involved here. We've got to try to find an end to this because it is going to collapse. And I don't want to say I told you so, but it's starting to happen in team sports. Individual, South Africa will always have incredible athletes. But in the team sports where your coaches are hired for certain reasons, South African cricket is a great example because they've got rid of so many great professional people that can help. Neil McKenzie was the batting coach. He's now coaching Bangladesh. Gary Kirsten coached India to World Cup triumph. He's now a consultant to Bangladesh. These kind of stories, that why aren't they in the South African system? South African sports administrators at the top, these presidents and CEOs who are taking a lot of money and enriching themselves, want yes people that are turning a blind eye to corruption, and people that are not strong. And they're
It's
getting puppets.
it's actually amazing how much of an influence just sport have in this country. I mean, sport is actually such a small thing. One can argue it's something that really doesn't it really doesn't matter in the greater context of the country, because what really doesn't make a difference whether the Springboks win or lose. But if we look at the effect that it has on the people and on the spirit of the people, it's something that can't be countered by anything else. As you said, when the Springboks won, we see all these. We see all these advertisements on TV, like Player 23 with Robbie Wessels, and the whole music video is just all this multiculturalism, and there's this white guy and this colored guy and this black guy and this Indian guy singing along and braaiing together, and you know, having a great time together. And it's not just that it's on the TV. People look at this music video and they enjoy it, and they they actually identify with Player 23, with this music video, and this is their reality now. But as you said, it's a fake Rainbow Nation. It's a false reality that is being created by the sports victory. And the moment that the sport starts to collapse, you see the actual problems going on. You see the corruption. You see the absolute hatred coming from various parties within this country towards each other. You see the fact that, you know, the multiculturalism project of Nelson Mandela has completely failed. People absolutely hate each other. People on Twitter tell each other that they want to kill each other for their land. They want to take their land, and so on and so forth. I could go on for the rest of the night. I could go on until 4 a.m.
Yeah.
talking about examples of these things happening right now. And it seems like sport is the only thing that we have left that's keeping this very fragile structure of a Rainbow Nation together. And if sports falls, there's absolutely nothing left to unify South Africans.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that either. And it's so sad because it could be fixed. But as I said to you, it's a deeply rooted cancer, and these administrators are just a law unto themselves, and they're very well protected. And most of them have got government involved, you know, from the Guptas were involved in the corruption in South African sport, you know, from the sports ministry to SASCOC to all the federations. I think I can probably count the amount of sporting federations in South Africa that are actually clean. There might be just a handful of them. You've got all these presidents and CEOs that they've corrupted the system. And it's all about getting lottery money in and helping each other. And these small federations that are working out of their homes, they're paying their mortgages on their houses through the federation, and they're basically fixing their cars through the federation. I mean, South African athletics, South African swimming, South African soccer, South African rugby, South African cricket, these are corrupt federations, and they have been allowed to be corrupt because SASCOG is so corrupt. And SASCOG is so corrupt, and they've been allowed to be corrupt because the sports ministry and the Department of Sport and Recreation is so corrupt. So if number one, like President Zuma, was totally corrupt, everybody underneath you goes, hey, it's a free fall. Let's help ourselves. But then again, you've got all these other corrupt entities with marketing companies, clothing suppliers. I mentioned Sedgars. Sedgars are like the Guptas of SA Sport. They've gone from a small clothing supplier to now they're building roads through the state, they're building classrooms here. They almost run the whole municipality in Vereeniging. It's laughable. And I suppliers of theirs and telling me how they get paid in cash in shoeboxes. And no one wants to investigate because this ministry said Balula's Dubai vacations. It all comes together. Where there's money, it's the root of all evil, and it is killing South African sport. No question.
The thing is, when I read about somebody being exposed for corruption, I'm not even surprised anymore. It's not even like, okay, this guy is a corrupt person. It's just like, well, you know, I expected it. This guy is somewhere involved in government, and now it comes out that he is in fact very corrupt, and this is the proof. But I'm not surprised at all anymore, because the picture that I'm getting is that every single person who is high up in government is in some way corrupt, and there's absolutely nobody who is actually, you know, Cato, who is actually, you know, a person of integrity who actually wants to help his people and is in politics for the sake of the country. It's just a bunch of elites filling their pockets as fast as they can while they see the rest of the country burn.
No, and I'm with you on that. Even the DA. I fed the DA sports ministry there. What do they call it there? They got like a sports minister. Well, like their, I don't know what they call it again. Anyway, shadow sports minister in the Democratic Alliance, and I fed them information for years. I mean, these guys are laughable. I don't know what they're getting paid for, because they're totally conflicted as well. You got Cobus Marais, who's a DA parliamentarian. He sits at the head of the SASCOG Finance Committee. He's been there for I don't know how many years. He knows of all the corruption, but he loves the gravy train as well. He gets to go to Olympic Games. He gets to travel around the world. He gets all the perks. He gets benefits. He probably gets his palms greased as well. It's a horrible system, and it makes me so sad that no one can put an end to it. And my lone crusade, some things changed, but at the end of the day, you need journalists with ethics and integrity, sports journalists, to actually start exposing this stuff, starting to write about it, starting to write about Yuri Rue and Mark Alexander, president of Saru, totally corrupt. The Marty story with Yuri Rue directing those funds, it's quite funny because I broke that story. I don't know how many years ago, 6 years ago. And then Adrian Basson and the News 24 guys kind of took credit for it. But I was the guy that broke the story. But it doesn't matter. Work together as sports journalists. But everyone turned against me. People said, "What's this guy's just full of conspiracies." Conspiracies? Everything that's in my book is factual. Most of it's already been vindicated. And as time goes on, more and more stuff is going to be corroborated. And the South African sporting system is collapsing as we speak. As we speak, it's in front of our eyes.
Do you see any way of stopping this from happening, or do you think it's inevitable that it will be a complete collapse?
I don't know, Willem. I don't know how you stop it when it's so corrupt from top to bottom. And now they've got. I mean, when have we had a sports minister who knows anything about sport? I mean,
well, when did we have any minister who knows anything about the thing that he's a minister about?
I think Steve Chweti was our last decent sports minister who knew anything. I mean, we've got that deputy sports minister who's Gert Oosthuizen, who's been sitting there like a puppet, going and drinking going on all these binge tours all over the world. But no one really. No, we need people who know sport. Get former athletes involved as coaches, administrators. Clean up the sports system. Start at grassroots level. Stop the corruption at national lottery level. I mean, if you think these distribution agency members are so conflicted, you've got two of the biggest members distributing lottery funds, and they're the president and vice president of Athletics South Africa. So when Athletics South Africa gets 25 million from the lottery, should we be surprised? Of course not. And when there's a national football museum that's been getting 20 million from the national lottery over the years, and there's no national football museum, should we be surprised? Where's that 20 million? It's so easy. It's gone into people's back pockets. Dr. Harold Adams, correct. Dr. Harold Adams sits on the Lottery Distribution Agency, vice president of South African Athletics, president of Boland Athletics. Do you think Boland Athletics has got any money from the lottery? You must see how much money they've got. It's a joke, no one puts up the red flag.
That's a whole different story with the lottery. I actually remember reading The Godfather, the book, and this mafia boss just said that whenever there's drugs or gambling involved, you don't want to get involved because it's too much of a dirty business. So even coming from a mafia boss, they say they don't really want to get into gambling. It's too dirty.
No, I mean it's the lottery is the root of all evil, and when it should be going to really good causes, which they do, they go to charities and they go to really good causes. But there is, I mean, if I go through when I go through the lottery payments, the beneficiary payments, I pick up 10 every time, or I pick up 10 or 20 out of sport like that are very, very strange. And when SAGPO is the beautiful one. It's called the Voluntary Organization of FET College Principals, SAGPO. They've got 40 million from the lottery over the last 3 years for sports projects. Would you like to know where those sports projects are? It would be great to know where they are. They don't exist.
Nowhere.
And Dr. Harold Adams on the Lottery Distribution Agency gets involved with a guy, I think it's Chris O'Connor, who used to be the CEO of Love Life. They do the application together, and 20 million probably has been spread out amongst 4 or 5 people. It's a great way to live. It's easy money.
Well, let's talk a bit about the grassroots. Let's take, for example, Craven Week in rugby, which is the people who do not know, it's the It's the schools that choose from the best schools athletes in rugby to compete against each other in the different provinces. Now, I think Craven Week is probably the worst quota system of all rugby teams in this country. And if you look at the logic behind the quotas, it should be the other way around. It should be the top teams that have the most quotas, and then these teams, like the Craven Week team, should have no quotas at all, because the kids. Let me just make that. Let me just do the mathematics in my head. Okay, so the kids that starts playing Craven Week this year was born in 2007. 2007. That's 13 years after apartheid ended. So there's no way that these kids could have possibly benefited from apartheid. They were born 13 years after apartheid ended, but now they are being subjected to the absolute worst form of quotas in the whole rugby structure. How is this sustainable? It looks like the pyramid is upside down when it comes to quotas in sport.
And I'm glad you brought out Craven Week, because it's been in the news this week. I don't know if you saw, but Craven Week players, most of the provinces now have asked their players, they've been selected, but now you got to pay 6,000 Rand as a player to go to Craven Week, to stay in a dormitory, get a bus ride, and to pay for your meals. So no longer is it sponsored. So South African Rugby lost Coca-Cola as a Craven Week sponsor. And now South African Rugby, which is paying your CEO, I don't know, 5 million a year. You've got your president who's taking kickbacks. The provincial, the unions are not actually paying for the players, which is unbelievable. So you got the CEOs and presidents of all the rugby unions probably living lives of luxury, driving fancy cars, big houses, and you've now got Craven Week players. Now, I'm not saying, I don't know what the percentage is, but if I'm thinking now as a grassroots player, you're now in this Craven Week team, and now you got to go home to your parents who are probably not earning more than 6,000 Rand a month, and I need 6,000 Rand to go to reach my dream, to have my dream, to play in Craven Week, and then the kid can't afford it, and what happens? Which is, it's ludicrous. So what should be happening is all these kids in the grassroots system, you should have these players that are starting to be well looked after at a very young age, put in academies, got sponsors for. But some of the rugby academies have fallen apart because of corruption and maladministration. Border rugby is a joke. The feeder system for South African rugby, Border and Eastern Province, two of the real grassroots development areas, are finished.
And one would expect, especially Border, to be one of the factories of pumping out so-called previously disadvantaged players. If you really want to get black players who can actually play the sport and develop them, you should start at Border. That's the place where Kulisi and these guys come from. That's where most of these big black players come from. So why is there absolutely nothing there to develop these players? So the only thing that they actually do is they force Pretoria, which is a almost 60% white city, to still have this massive quotas in their provincial teams. That's what's really making me angry.
And it makes me angry because, as I said to you before, quotas are a direct result of lazy administration and failure to implement grassroots development, because these administrators don't want to do it and they don't care about it. So let's just put quotas in because we want these kids to get an opportunity. And it's so unfair for all the kids. It's unfair for the kids that you're pushing into the system because they know that some of them shouldn't be rightfully in that position, that they've been selected ahead of other kids because of the color of their skin. And how do you tell some of these white kids? How many kids have given up playing cricket, soccer, rugby because they know that only 5 white players are allowed in certain provincial teams? How do you tell kids of ages 13, 14, 15, my son, you're not selected, my daughter, you're not selected because of the color of your skin? And as you rightfully bring up, a lot of these kids were born, 12, 13, 14 years ago. And a lot of these kids have given up on their dream. Talent has gone overseas. Rugby's got the biggest player drain. Cricket's got the coal pack, the players leaving overseas. And a lot of kids just give up. And they start playing individual sports where they know they can go cycling or play golf or whatever. And a lot of kids turn to video games, which is an unhealthy society. School sport, grassroots development. I had every opportunity as a kid. I'd go to school at 7 o'clock in the morning, not come home till 6 o'clock at night. I wanted to play everything, and I had the opportunity. Why is it not happening today? The resources are there, but it's all swallowed up mostly by greedy, corrupt administrators, lazy people.
Well, that's exactly the same thing that Sia Kulisi said in that interview that he got so much flack from all the liberal media from, when he said that he doesn't support quotas because he said that, even in the Springboks, he as a black player doesn't know whether he is there because of his talent or because of his skin color. And if you are a black player that plays for the Springboks, for example, you will never know. There's no way for you to know for sure whether you are actually good enough to be there. And it's actually also killing the team spirit, because the players who are there who are not quota players will look down on these players. Even if it's subconscious, they will always look down on these players on a subconscious level and think, I actually work hard to be here, and you are here because of the color of your skin, and that kills the team spirit. You can't even if most of the team are actually there on talent, you can't expect these guys to play together as a solid unit, as a team. But I'm happy that you brought up individual sports. You say many people leave these team sports for individual sports where they know they can actually excel. But that's actually the worst for me. I've read this on Solidarity's blog. Um, if you look at team sports, even at such a young age, there's always this plausible deniability. If you look at the other side of the story for the white kids, there's always this idea that, maybe I am actually not good enough to be in that team. But when you look at individual sports like running, for example, a 100-meter dash, or hurdles, or even, javelin or discus or whatever, you are the best if you are the best. If you threw that discus the furthest, then you are the best. But they even want to start establishing quotas there now. The government has released a statement in which they said that that the athletics teams needs to be a certain percentage black. So even if that white kid won the 100-meter dash and the black kid came second, they have to pick the black kid. So it's just impossible to have any deniability in such a situation, and that is really going to kill the spirit of
No
these
question.
kids.
And they tried it for golf as well. Years back, the government tried to put pressure on the Sunshine Tour to make sure that even if some of the black players missed the cut, that they would still play on the weekend. So they wanted to change the rules of golf to suit their own needs. But again, I come back to this grassroots development. And can you imagine if you had all these coaches and administrators? When I traveled through Africa, I'll never forget this, Willem. One of the greatest days I've ever seen in Nairobi. It was actually in Eldoret when I was visiting Kip Keino, one of Kenya's great Olympians. And in Eldoret, they had the Kenyan Olympic trials one day. It wasn't even Olympic trials. It was called an identification process. From 7 o'clock in the morning till 7 o'clock at night at a big track in the middle of Eldoret, they must have had about 500 kids enjoying a day out with food provided, bussed in from all the different schools. And there were coaches, administrators identifying talent from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. These kids they were exhausted by the end of the day. And what they did then is a lot of these coaches looked at different kids, put them in different field events, gave them different track distances to run. And then they identified talent, and then they take 30 or 40 of the best kids and they put them into an academy, and they look after them, and they become Kenya's future Olympic champions. That's the way to do it. It's simple. But do you want to? Are these guys prepared to put the resources into a whole day for how about 20 administrators and 20 top athletic coaches going to a field in Diepsloot on a Saturday all day and identifying talent, or Soweto or Ekurhuleni, wherever it is? Do it. They don't do it. Big games where there's no attendances, rugby games, soccer games, cricket games. Have they ever thought about bussing in kids from all over the townships to come spend a day at cricket? How do you get role models if all the televisions, if everything's on SuperSport and the majority of South Africans can't afford SuperSport? How do you get a role model? How do you dream to be a great cricketer, a great cricketer, great rugby player? They don't see the sport, half of them. So how do you create these dreams? It's a complicated system. It could be a simple fix, but you need the willingness of these corrupt officials to change.
Well, of course, if you're just pocketing money all the time and you don't have to do anything, why change?
And you're not being caught.
Why change?
and you're not being caught, and you're protected by the system.
Exactly, and nothing's going to ever happen to you. You can just, in Afrikaans we have this saying, as het pap reën skep. If it rains porridge, then you need to start pouring some into your bowl, and that's exactly what's happening.
True. And yeah, a lot of teams are now being selected on wealth and not even merit. So not only your skin color, but now swimming. South Africa is a great example. I mean, what a corrupt entity that is. I mean, that's just a useless federation. That we've got so many great swimmers. They lost their sponsor Telkom about 8 years ago. They haven't replaced them, and now they cry poverty all the time. Now for a swimmer who wants to represent South Africa, you select to represent South Africa, and generally you got to fork out 30,000 Rand to go swim at an event. Whether it be
most
Europe,
of the Olympic sports, it's like that. You have to pay for your own.
Correct. Pay your own way. And you know what? Some of the kids, a lot of the kids also have to pay for the coaches and administrators to go because the federation's bankrupt. I don't know. Some of the top federations, basically, a kid is also not only paying for themselves, but they're paying for the coaches and administrators as well. That's ludicrous.
Of course, yeah. Tell me, do you think you gave quite a lot of names of people who you say are definitely corrupt and have done a lot of things that can be corrupt? And also in your book, I just want to point out I have read it and it's brilliant, and you can check it out on Amazon. It's the only place where I think you can actually buy the book, but I included the link in the description. But in any case, in this book, there's no way we can ever touch even a little bit of what's going on in this book because it's just so much. But in this book, you are naming people by the name, and you name their crimes, and you give the evidence for them committing these crimes, this corruption. Do you think anything will happen to any of these people after this has been put out there into the public?
Well, I mean, we've got Hybrid Safika Media that are now trying to block the launch of the book in South Africa because they know how dirty they are. They don't want to be exposed. And I'm sure there'll be more legal interdicts to try and stop the book being launched. But again, a lot of these corrupt people have such thick skin that it doesn't matter to them. They get named and shamed, and it's like no big deal. And I called it, Willem. The SASCOC Commission of Inquiry was the biggest waste of time. It was a personal vendetta to try and get even with Gideon Sam because Tubby Reddy and Vinesh Maharaj ran SASCOC like their own business. Millions disappeared. They got fired. Then Gideon Sam took over, and now they're supposedly clean. It's laughable. I mean, is FIFA clean? FIFA had changed that they're not clean either. And you have these big boys clubs, and that's where you have another major problem. These big boys clubs, they hang on to power. They get their friends into all these good jobs. Yes, people that can turn a blind eye to corruption. Sam Ramsami's over 80. He's still involved in South African swimming. He's involved in international swimming. He still sits on the International Olympic Committee and then blocks every time there's a complaint about SASCOC. He blocks it because he's big friends with the IOC president, Thomas Bach. You can't get past the goalkeeper. So this information doesn't get out. The SASCOC Commission of Inquiry, the results came out, over nearly a year ago? Nothing's changed. Nothing's happened. The sports ministry is laughable. And now you've put, a good luck to Nati Ntetwa as the new sports minister. He's now got two portfolios, arts and culture and sport. Please get someone who's passionate about sport, who's going to be focused on sport and focused on cleaning up sport. But why would he do it? Because his friends have to go.
You can say the exact same thing for any of the departments in our state. So actually, I would argue, like America, where you live in right now, the equivalent of a minister would be a secretary, but on the entire cabinet, there sits 15 people. And in South Africa, we have more than 60 people sitting in the cabinet in this country. So you can get rid of at least 75% of them already, and then just have 16 people there to manage the country. That would be my argument. But the whole system is just a bunch of people who are put into jobs that most of these jobs are not even real jobs. They are made up. Yeah, Minister of Arts and Culture. Why does there even need to be a Minister of Arts and Culture? Why does there need to be a Minister of Women? These things are ridiculous. But in any case, these people are just put into these positions so they can draw the salary of a minister. And then while they draw this massive salary, overlooking a department that shouldn't even exist in the first place, they basically roam the state and see where they can steal more and more and more money from other possible ventures of stealing money. And it's just a sick system, and I can't see it going on like this. I think the only future that I can see with the system in South Africa is complete collapse, and sports
Uh,
is just a very, very small part of it.
I'm with you. And that's what it is. It is a very small part of it. But if you really dig deep, you're talking about just hundreds and hundreds of millions that's been abused. In my book alone, you just see hundreds of millions that have gone to waste, that have gone to people's back pockets, that have just been spent on junkets overseas and trips and holidays, family vacations, taking your family to the Olympic Games instead of athletes. And when you deprive that athlete of a chance to go to the Olympic Games because you want to take your family instead, and that's what
How
happens.
ridiculous is that? It's mind
That's
blowing,
that's what
absolutely mind blowing.
I mean. You ask the hockey men and women today in South Africa what happened to their dreams, and because SASCOC doesn't want to spend money on sending a team of 15 players to, instead of those 15, instead family and friends are going. It's just
And the South African hockey team is actually a team that stood a chance of being on the podium.
and SASCOC have always gone with this so-called criteria. We only take medal hopefuls. If you qualify, how do you know you're not a medal hopeful until you go compete with the best in the world at the Olympic Games? And it's a 4-year cycle. Look after the athletes in the whole 4-year cycle. Don't come 6 months before the Olympic Games and said, "Oh, we'll give you some money to help you." These are athletes that need to train day in and day out. A lot of them have to work jobs. And then they go and they give up on their dream, or they give up on the job to play hockey. They qualify for the Olympic Games, and then they're told they're not going. It's all wrong. The system's all wrong. And it's time that the federation started really building up a case, started cleaning themselves out first, and then try to clean out SASCOG and the sports ministry and stuff like that. But as I said to you, it's a deeply rooted cancer. Yes, I've got the answers, but it's to implement these systems that are just too difficult. I think it's almost too far gone.
Well, the information is out there. The proof is out there. Your book is out there. Now all we can do is look and see if people actually do anything about it. Just for one last time, I'm going to show the people the book here on Amazon. Let me just do that. Share my screen here. All right, so yeah, you can see this is the book on Amazon: Sports, Greed and Betrayal, Wanted for Crimes Against Journalism, which is Mr. Joffe's book, in which he actually names and shames the people who are part of all of this corruption and who benefited from this corruption and who has stolen a lot of money from sports in South Africa. And I have read the book; it's brilliant. I would recommend it to anyone. It's actually quite funny. We have talked about this in the interview already, the fact that it's not for sale at any bookstores in South Africa. But I have provided the link on Amazon. So if you want to go check it out, you can buy it as an ebook or actual paperback book. But yeah, that's about it. I think both of us have been talking for quite a long time. So I think we can end it off here.
Philip, I just want to say just a big thank you to you for your time, for your support, and also, just some of your compliments as well. And it's refreshing to be able to do an interview like this where you can speak your mind with no hidden agendas. I mean, you're just playing a big role in South African society. So once again, I salute you. And I'm hoping my book will be available in South Africa still by the beginning of July. Right now, the launch has been cancelled because of legal threats as well. Let's see what happens. I'll keep you informed as well. Twitter, @Joffe is my boy. I still poke the bear and put out a lot of information. And on Facebook, Graeme Joffe as well. And, I'm going to keep on fighting. I don't want to give up the fight. I got a passion for South Africa still. That's my country, despite being chased out of the country. And I'm fighting also for the athletes. And maybe it'll be nice one day when one of the mainstream media gives my book a review. That'll be interesting.
Well, I actually just looked at Amazon, see if I can buy your book, not the Kindle version, just the paperback version, and it seems like they do ship to South Africa. So it is possible to buy your book if you are in South Africa, and also if you want to just buy the ebook, it's very simple. So there is a way for people to actually read it. That's just some good news.
Great, Philip. Many thanks once again, and just thanks to all your listeners and viewers out there. And we can only hope. Let's make South Africa great again.
All right. Thank you very much for coming up, and thank you very much for everyone who watched this. Be sure to share this video with your friends. I think we have learned a lot on here. I think this was very interesting for me, at least. We've spoken about so many different topics, such a variety of things from the start, and I think the information that we have spoken about here is very, very important. So be sure to share this video around. It's such a shame that that my video that I actually sent out the link onto all my WhatsApp groups and all my social media doesn't work anymore. But we make do with what we can. And thanks for watching, and thank you, Graeme, for coming up.
What a pleasure. Thank you, Willem.